Welcome back to CSS Breakdown, book by book. Today, in Season 08, Episode 04, we're diving into Chapter 4 of Andrew J. Williams, Amelia Hadfield, and J. Simon Rofe's International History and International Relations to unravel one of the most fundamental yet paradoxical concepts in global affairs, sovereignty.
It really is fundamental, isn't it? Sits right at the core of how we understand states acting on the global stage.
Absolutely. But it's not straightforward.
Not at all. What's really interesting is that sovereignty, well, it's not just one thing. It's kind of a mix, part political attribute, part legal status.
Which creates layers of meaning.
Exactly. Layers and often some pretty deep internal tensions.
Yeah.
Back in the 50s, Charles de Vischer noted how international law struggles with the realities of international relations, saying basically that specific situations matter way more than general rules. Sovereignty is a prime example of that tension.
Right. So our mission today, for you listening, is to trace this whole idea. Where did it come from? How does it work legally and politically? And crucially, what challenges does it face now? Things like, economic interdependence, international law itself.
It's quite a journey we're embarking on through philosophy, political thinking, legal arguments.
Okay, let's kick things off right at the beginning. The word itself, sovereignty, where does that actually come from?
Okay, so its roots are in classical Latin, the word super, meaning above.
Above makes sense.
Yeah. And that shifted in Middle Latin to superanus, basically meaning that which is higher. We first see that recorded around 1000 CE.
1,000 years ago, wow.
Then in early French, you get souverain, expressing supremacy. By the late 1200s, Philippe de Remy uses souverain specifically for, political control over land and people.
Okay. And there was another term, too.
Right. Plenitude potestas in medieval Latin. That referred more to concentrated power, maybe in a ruler.
So how did we get from just sort of basic social groups to actual political units, like states?
Well, that big shift happens when the seat of power, where the authority actually lies, becomes clearly linked with a specific territory and an identifiable population. And crucially, it's all governed by observable laws.
And the Greeks had thoughts on this early on.
Oh, absolutely. Ancient Greece is fascinating here. For Greek political thinkers, sovereignty wasn't really about the ruler. It was about the law.
The law itself is sovereign.
Precisely. Plato famously said something like, I see that the state in which the law is above the rulers and the rulers are the inferiors of the law has salvation.
Powerful stuff.
It is. And Aristotle, his student, sort of echoed that. He thought supreme power was with the citizens, but the best setup. Make the law sovereign and the government its servant. They were clearly uncomfortable giving just one body total authority to use law however it pleased.
Which makes sense. But then we hit the Roman era and things split.
A real divergence in thinking.
A major one. You basically get two schools of thought battling it out. First, the populist school, carrying on those Greek ideas. Think Cicero.
He argued for a supreme and permanent law. And he said political authority needs the consent of the whole people. So for them, the populace, the people, were sovereign before the law.
Okay, that's one view. What's the other?
The other is the absolutist school. This was more the emperor's view. Simple and direct.
Yeah.
The emperor is sovereign.
Not the law, not the people.
Nope. They had that famous phrase, quod principi placet legis habet vigorem. Basically, what the ruler wants has the force of law.
So the ruler's whim is law.
Essentially. Now, some Roman jurists, like Ulpian, tried to bridge this gap. They'd say, okay, the emperor has power, but that power was originally given to him by the people.
Oh, bit of a compromise.
Sort of.
Yeah.
But you still see that fundamental tension is power from the people and law, or from the absolute ruler, and that tension really doesn't go away.
No, it definitely carries into the medieval period, which sounds like a real power struggle, a three-way one.
Absolutely. You've got the church, led by the Pope, pushing its authority. You've got individual monarchs trying to consolidate their own power within their kingdoms. And then you've got the Holy Roman Emperor claiming a kind of universal authority over Christendom.
So how did those Roman ideas play out here? The populist idea first.
Well, that idea persisted. Many medieval thinkers argued that the ruler was bound by the laws of the nation, not as superior to them. Figures like Aquinas, Gratian said law isn't just some arbitrary command. It reflects nature and justice.
Right.
And the English jurist Bracton put it really clearly, where there is no law, there is no king. The king is under God and the law, for it is the law which makes the king. So for them, the only real sovereignty was the laws, maybe under God or nature.
So law is still supreme for some, but the absolutist side was gaining ground.
Definitely. You had this concept of Res Publica Christiana, this idea of a great Christian unity under God. Power was sort of theoretically split between the church's spiritual authority, the sacerdotium, and the emperor's secular authority, the regnum.
But theory and reality often differ.
Always. By the 1200s, monarchs were increasingly saying, hang on, in my kingdom, I'm in charge of secular stuff. You see French kings openly proclaiming they were emperor in their own domain, quia imperator in regno suo by 1302.
Basically telling the emperor and the pope to back off their turf.
Pretty much, we don't answer to you here.
And Robert of Naples, he really pushed this, didn't he? A dramatic example.
Well, absolutely dramatic. He flat out defied imperial orders, claiming monarchs could make their own laws. He actually got convicted of high treason, crimen lese majestatis.
Wow. But the Pope stepped in.
Yes, and this is huge. Pope Clement V supported Robert. In a papal bull called Pastoralis Cura, he argued the emperor had no authority over other monarchs. And maybe unsurprisingly, he also argued the Pope was superior to the emperor.
That's a game changer.
It really was. It effectively killed the emperor's claim to be Dominus Mundi, Lord of the world, and shattered that whole idea of a single, unified Christian political body. Clement's view tied sovereignty directly to the individual ruler within their specific territory, a massive step towards monarchs holding distinct, particular authority.
So this internal power struggle really cleared the path for monarchs to assert absolute control, which must have directly challenged the church's power.
Directly and profoundly. You see rulers like Francis I in France and, most famously, Henry VIII in England starting to, well, nationalize the Catholic Church in their lands.
Taking control.
Making agreements to appoint clergy, control church finances. Henry, of course, went further, broke with Rome entirely, seized church property, set up the Church of England.
And thinkers at the time supported this.
Some did. Vittoria argued princes got their right to rule from God, making them sort of vicars of the church in their own territory, giving them full control. And then the Protestant Reformation, with Martin Luther, really pushed this. Monarchs are sovereign in secular and religious matters in their realm.
Which leads to that famous principle.
Cuius regio, ius religio, whose realm, his religion, cemented at the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. Basically, the ruler decides the territory's religion, external religious interference. Largely over. As the historian figures noted, destroying the church's independence removed the last obstacle to unity within the state.
Okay, so the stage is set. This brings us to a really key shift. The idea of the state itself becoming the vessel, the container of sovereignty, not just the ruler anymore.
Exactly. The old idea of res publica, the commonwealth, transforms into a more secular concept of a distinct polity. It's unified, has identifiable people, borders, its own political interests, and crucially, it's ruled by a single supreme authority. Early modern sovereignty, the kind that really informs our understanding today, is defined as supreme authority within a given territory.
And the big changes.
The big change is sovereignty becomes an attribute of the state itself. It's permanent, not just tied to the person ruling at the time. This really solidifies the state as the main player.
Enter Jean Bodin, 1576. He puts this all together systematically.
He does. Bodin is absolutely pivotal. He skillfully blended aspects of both the law-based populace and the ruler-based absolutist traditions. He defines sovereignty as more than just being superior. It's the greatest force and the supreme authority within defined territorial limits.
And the key insight.
The key insight is making sovereignty permanent, an enduring feature of the state. This provides a lasting justification for state actions, security, war, everything. Legally, Bodin was also adamant. Sovereignty had to be absolute and indivisible. No subordination to external powers, no division internally.
He was writing during religious wars in France, right? So order was paramount.
Absolutely. His focus on the procedural aspects, the need for absolute unified power, was a direct response to the chaos he saw. He wanted order.
Bodin, Machiavelli, Hobbes, they really laid the groundwork for the modern powerful state.
That's a great way to put it. They're a powerful trio, all shaped by seeing intense civil violence. Machiavelli's raison d'etat, reason of state, basically says do whatever it takes for the state's interest. Hobbes, writing after the English Civil War, argued individuals must give up their power to the state permanently and without restriction for security. Sovereignty became the ultimate justification for these potentially harsh means. But not everyone agreed on this absolute power idea. Hugo Grotius, the Dutch jurist, offered a different angle. Grotius focused more on the legal side. He saw sovereignty less as the ruler's specific power and more as a legal status that every state possesses. This kind of universalizes it. It's a common legal attribute for all states, big or small. He defines sovereign power as that whose actions are not subject to the legal control of another.
Okay, that feels like a step towards international law as we know it.
Okay.
Which brings us inevitably to the Peace of Westphalia, 1648, end of the 30 Years' War. Everyone points to this as a massive turning point. Why? Even if sovereignty isn't explicitly mentioned.
It's monumental because it provided the practical framework that cemented these ideas. It was a way to manage the hundreds of competing claims that fueled the war. While territories were mostly restored, the key was establishing the freedom of rulers to govern based on sovereignty, not old loyalties to pope or emperor.
So what are the big takeaways from Westphalia?
There are four main ones. First, the sovereign state emerges as the single dominant model for political authority in Europe. Places like Switzerland and the Netherlands got uncontested sovereignty. Pope Innocent X was furious, famously calling the treaties null, void, invalid.
He wasn't happy.
Not at all. Second, it basically ended interventions based on religion. This largely stopped the huge religious wars in Western Europe. Third, it enshrined Bodin's idea. Sovereignty belongs to the state, not just the ruler. And fourth, critically, it established the legal equality of sovereignty. All states are legally the same, even if vastly different in power or size. It was a complex mix, but foundational.
A complete overhaul, really. What were the lasting principles that came out of it?
Westphalia laid down about 5 key points that still resonate. 1. No more church or imperial meddling in state civil affairs. States are secular authorities now. 2. No forcing religious conversion, a right of religious non-interference. 3. No interfering in how other states govern, tax, or handle religion's secular non-interference. 4. Monarchs got back their right to make treaties and alliances. And 5. These rights applied equally to all sovereign states. That equality principle is huge.
Okay, so the state system is forming. But then, as absolute monarchies start to fade, this other idea gains steam. The social contract. What's that about?
Right, the social contract theory. It circles back to the idea that ultimate authority might lie with the populace and its laws. It's basically an agreement, explicit or implicit, where the people give authority to a ruler on the condition they rule fairly.
This wasn't entirely new, right?
No, versions existed in the medieval era. Aquinas, Marsilius of Padua mentioned it. But it gets a new emphasis. Hobbes saw it as a one-way street. People give up power absolutely for security. But Jean-Jacques Rousseau really championed plebiscite sovereignty, meaning sovereignty is the public expression of the will of a whole community. His famous term was the general will. The social contract, the pact social, is where each of us puts in common his person and all his power under the supreme direction of the general will. For Rousseau, like Hobbes actually, this contract was the title deed of sovereignty.
And this general will idea, it had massive political impact. Sounds revolutionary.
It absolutely was. It provided the philosophical fuel for both the American and French revolutions. Think of Thomas Paine saying that in republics like America, sovereign power stays where nature placed it in the people. This thinking turns the internal will of the people into a potent external force. It really solidifies the idea that sovereignty ultimately comes from the governed. So you see this growing link between the legal political idea of sovereignty and the actual practice of states, especially from Westphalia onwards. Then, fast forward to 1815, after Napoleon, the Congress of Vienna, this further tidies up the rules.
How so?
Well, it drastically cut down the number of sovereign states in Europe from hundreds down to about 39, mostly by merging them. And crucially, it formalized recognition by other states, especially the great powers, as the main way a state becomes accepted as sovereign. Recognition plus legal equality really shaped the 19th century European map.
Okay, that's Europe. But what about the rest of the world? How did things like colonialism and these new international organizations affect sovereignty?
They had huge impacts, often in tension with each other. First, colonialism. 19th century international law, largely written by Europeans, developed these doctrines about uncivilized peoples. This created legal justifications for acquiring territory like conquest or cession by treaty.
So sovereignty became tied to European standards.
Exactly. It became identified with specific European cultural and legal practices. It was reshaped and spread globally through colonialism, often undermining or destroying existing non-European forms of political organization.
International organizations, IOs.
They emerged because problems started crossing borders. More often think trade, communication, disease. There was a growing mismatch, as the book puts it, between the scale of problems and the authority of individual states. So IOs were created in the 19th century to manage these shared issues. Even the Congress of Vienna set up a Congress system for regular diplomatic meetings. IOs were a practical response to the limits of purely state-based sovereignty in an increasingly connected world. Then, after World War I, things shift again. Self-determination becomes a really important concept championed by Woodrow Wilson.
Right, sovereignty resides in the community.
Exactly. This starts to shape the content of sovereignty, and it also briefly changed how states were recognized. It wasn't just about having control. Some argued new states needed a democratic constitution ensuring political freedom and minority rights.
Did that stick?
Not really, especially after World War II. Decolonization happened rapidly, and recognition was often granted to former colonies without these strict criteria. This led to a huge influx of new sovereign states into the UN, but many lacked strong internal governance or democratic structures, leading to later problems.
Which brings us to today, contemporary sovereignty. And you mentioned IR, international relations, and international law see it differently.
Yeah, there's often a disconnect. IR sometimes uses a simpler, almost tautological view. States act like states because they're sovereign. It focuses on the consequences, anarchy, security dilemmas, interventions, sometimes without getting deep into the legal weeds.
Whereas international law.
International law has a much more detailed and, frankly, complex and paradoxical view. Ian Brownlee, a key legal scholar, highlighted three crucial things. One, sovereignty and state equality are the basic constitutional doctrine of international law, governing a community where states have uniform legal personality. Two, all states have this legal personality and equality. Sovereignty covers the basics of statehood and legal relations. Three, this leads to principal corollaries like exclusive control over territory, non-intervention by others, and the idea that obligations generally require consent.
But you also said it's a troublesome paradox in law. Why? What's paradoxical?
It's this Janus-faced quality looking inward, internal power, and outward, external independence. The paradoxes are deep. It arose from claims of equality, but it's inherently exclusivist. It draws lines. It's supposedly based on law, but sovereigns can, and sometimes do, act outside the law. They claim supreme power, yet must treat other sovereigns as equals.
That contradiction Divisher mentioned.
Exactly. He said sovereigns follow the power impulse, using war to get what they want while paying lip service to law, living in contradiction with the legal order they invoke. There's also a big accountability problem. If sovereignty shifts from the people to the state apparatus, can governments act independently of their people's will? It raises huge questions.
Okay, let's try to nail down some specific oppositions within sovereignty itself that might help clarify these tensions.
Good idea. First up, internal versus external sovereignty. Internal is pretty straightforward. Supreme power within your borders, over your people, making laws, enforcing them.
And external.
External is about freedom from outside control, the ability to interact with other states as an equal, sovereign equality. Interestingly, internal sovereignty historically came first. Remember, the king is emperor in his own kingdom. External independence followed logically. Today, though, you really need both simultaneously for full sovereignty. They reinforce each other. Next, there's positive versus negative sovereignty. This distinction comes largely from R.H. Jackson.
Okay, positive sovereignty.
Positive sovereignty is about capability. Does the government actually have the resources, the organization, the wherewithal to effectively govern, to provide political goods, security, welfare, etc.? It's a substantive practical condition. What can the state actually do?
And negative.
Negative sovereignty is the formal legal condition. It's about freedom from outside interference, non-intervention. As the book says, non-intervention and sovereignty are basically two sides of the same coin. It's the legal right to be left alone, ensuring independence and formal equality between states. Ben Cleffens called it sovereignty's outward face versus its inward face or autonomy.
Makes sense. And the last pair, absolute versus relative.
Right. Absolute versus relative sovereignty. Absolute sovereignty suggests a totally unfettered right to act classically, the right to wage war, conquer, based purely on raison d'etat. It often refers to the scope of authority. The state is sovereign over everything within its borders.
And
relative sovereignty acknowledges constraints. States are bound by treaties, agreements, international norms. Their power isn't absolute in practice. Now, international law tends to see sovereignty itself as indivisible, absolute in its legal essence. But IR, looking at the political reality, often sees it as limited, truncated by globalization, IOs, interventions. States might only be sovereign in the same truncated, conditional, limited sense that everyone else is.
So law says it's absolute. Politics says it's relative in practice.
That's a common way to see the tension, yes. Are these real legal limits or just practical political constraints on how sovereignty gets exercised? The European Union is a perfect testing ground for all this. It's treaty-based, multi-level, has powerful institutions like the Commission and the European Court of Justice making decisions that bind member states.
Which sparks the huge debate. Does joining the EU diminish sovereignty, or is it an exercise of sovereignty?
Exactly that debate. The hard legal line is, joining a treaty is exercising your sovereignty. You choose to pool power. Sovereignty itself remains intact, indivisible. You transfer the exercise of certain powers, but you do it because you are sovereign, and crucially, you can usually withdraw, reclaiming those powers. So it might limit your internal positive sovereignty, what you can do, but not your external negative sovereignty, your legal statehood.
But the political argument.
The political argument, often heard in IR or European studies, says, wait a minute. If you pool unique sovereign powers, the EU's combined authority can become something bigger, something that does limit the member states' individual sovereignty in a real way.
Are there criteria for when that line might be crossed?
Brownlee suggests some. Does the organization use majority voting? Can it decide its own jurisdiction? Are its decisions binding without member consent? The EU, with qualified majority voting, the Commission's power, and the ECJ's rulings certainly pushes towards those boundaries. It's a significant pooling of power, arguably more than just a simple exercise of pre-existing sovereignty. It's complicated.
It really is. What strikes me is how this concept, sovereignty, with roots going back centuries, maybe millennia, it's still so incredibly dynamic, so contested, it's not settled history at all.
Not even close. States are always changing internally, society shifts, and they're constantly pushed and pulled by external forces internationally. So sovereignty, which kind of covers both internal organization and external representation, is inevitably going to be, as the book says, ambiguous, challenged, and flux-ridden. It's always in motion.
So for you listening, trying to make sense of global events, what's the key takeaway here?
I think the main thing is recognizing that sovereignty isn't monolithic. There are multiple definitions packed inside that one word. You've got the jurist positivist view, invisible authority, the political relativist, distributed power, the titular symbolic head of state, the legal sovereign who administers law, the political constitutional sovereign where power originates, like the people. Understanding these different facets, these different meanings, is crucial to avoid confusion and really analyze what's going on.
Right, using the right lens for the right situation. Okay, let's wrap up with our final provocative thought for you to mull over. Here it is. If sovereignty, as we've discussed, can be transcended economically by things like global markets and attenuated politically by powerful international organizations or even interventions, is it still the fundamental bedrock organizing principle of international relations that it was considered for centuries? Or are we actually watching it slowly, maybe inevitably, being redefined in the 21st century? Something to think about.